The Nothing Phone 3 comes out of the gate with a flashy new Glyph Matrix module, along with a flagship price. And this time, they're promising a step up from the mid-tier roots of their previous devices. Yet, oddly enough, the standout feature isn't the Glyph Matrix. It's a specialty camera mode that's very easy to overlook. For a brand that can sometimes be more about style over function, did the Nothing Phone 3 lose its way on its path to flagship? I'm Jason Howell, and I've been using the Nothing Phone 3 for more than 2 weeks now. Nothing did send me this device for review. They get no editorial say in my review. Let's dive right in. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Nothing brand. I've been basically collecting them over the last couple of years. They've done what most brands often shy away from, and that's build their brand on being truly different, being unique. And I give them a lot of credit for that. Are they successful? That's in the eye of the beholder. The transparent design, the glyph interactions that are different now, and I'll talk about that. A stock Android software that has some unique touches that don't distract, that truly add something to the experience. I actually heard someone say recently, Nothing is a design company that happens to make smartphones. And that really rings true. But does that mean that they make good smartphones? Well, let's take a look. Now, taking a look at the rear glass, it is once again transparent, and that's a huge staple of the Nothing brand. Transparent glass so you can see the technology underneath. This time though, you gotta admit it's a little bit emptier, right? At least down below this controversial area, which I'm going to talk about, the camera array. Lots of white space, not nearly as interesting, especially when you compare it against another Nothing phone that I reviewed earlier this year. The Nothing Phone 3A also happens to be white, but has a little bit more going on in that area. Here, it just makes it feel a bit emptier by comparison. And then of course you have the camera array, which a lot of people can't stand this asymmetrical approach. Personally, it doesn't bother me. I kind of like it. The balance is more, in this case, I'd say architectural than it is ornamental, if that makes sense. But overall, texture is what's really missing as a whole on the back. And I think that's what a lot of people are responding to. And let's just dive in on the back to the Glyph Matrix this time. Nothing's focus was clearly placed more on this module, the Glyph Matrix as they call it. This module replaces the Glyph LED bars that we've seen in all of their previous phones. And no question, it promises a lot more. It's more flexible, at least in theory. It's a small screen of 489 LEDs in kind of a circular pattern, and fits the dot matrix aesthetic of the UI as well. So there's a little bit of unity between the OS and the design of the OS and that dot matrix on the back. Now, yes, it has the little glyph toys that you can cycle through with this little capacitive button on the back. You just press into the glass. There's a haptic click, but there's no actual physical movement of that button. You get things like a magic 8-ball, spin the bottle. There's a stopwatch. There's even a mirror for selfie assistance, which is kind of neat, but I mean, you can hardly make out what you see there. So it's also kind of a head scratcher. There's flip to record, which is actually really cool. This shows a neat waveform in the Glyph Matrix that responds to your audio. So while you're recording audio inside of Essential Space, which I will talk about, that responds with the Glyph Matrix with that little readout. And the Glyph Matrix is an open source platform, so developers could make some interesting things for it. So in theory, this module offers more utility than broadly stretched LEDs that we've had in the past. But in practice, it's so completely focused to this one little area that I feel like it becomes less glanceable. The Glyph LEDs, by comparison, pretty impossible to ignore. They were stretched out over the entirety of the rear plate of the smartphone. The Glyph Matrix, on the other hand, requires your attention to really see what's going on there. Yes, it's very flexible, but it's a small point of the larger picture. It's a clever design. I love its creativity, but it's way too easy to ignore in use. You know what else has a clever design? Magtame Stay Cable. They're the sponsor of this video. Check it out. I am a cable demon. I have a huge box full of cables. I'm sure you do too. When I need a cable, I go diving into the box to find what I need. I don't keep them out in my space very often because I don't have the place for them. So when they're here, they end up flopping around and getting in the way, making the whole place messy. Well, Stay Cables are made for messy minds like Mine. And the idea is super simple. The cable has a small magnetic surround. The box includes these little metallic plates that you can stick to almost any surface. If that cable needs to be parked somewhere, you just snap it to the metallic plate and boom, there it stays. The magnet is actually really strong. The cables themselves are also quality construction, a real nice braided fabric material. And of course, all the major connectors that you might need. I actually have one in my Sequoia to keep the cable off the floor. Now it stays out of the way. I've got another one in my studio, which catches my A10 mini cable from falling to the floor, because sometimes I like to unplug it from the A10 mini and then plug it into a phone to charge when I'm not using the A10. Check my link in the description to grab one for yourself. Big thanks to Magtame for sponsoring this video. As for the display on the front, I would say the display looks great, right? It's colorful, it's vibrant, 120 hertz of refresh. When you're bouncing around, you can set that into a locked state or have it be dynamic if you choose. When you're outside, I'd say the outdoor visibility is strong enough. I was never squinting to try and see what was on the screen. Nothing does step down its pulse width dimming from the Nothing Phone 3A. This is one of the things that I highly praise the 3A for. It had 2160 hertz of pulse width dimming, and on the Nothing Phone 3, that's ramped down to 960 hertz, so a little bit slower. This might actually cause eye discomfort for those who happen to be sensitive to these flickers. It's not everyone, it's actually not me, but I know there are a lot of you out there. You'll want to know that and have that in mind when you think about the Nothing Phone 3. But overall, things look great. The glass on the front is Gorilla Glass 7i. That is a little bit of a step down, though, from kind of the top of the line Victus 2. Not quite as flagship as I would hope, especially for the price. Now, as for performance, get ready for another point of contention here. And you'll see there's a theme running through here. Snapdragon 8S Gen 4. That's what you're going to find inside. Also, my model has 16 gigs of RAM. Now, don't get me wrong. The phone feels pretty solid in most ways. I did notice some occasional slowdowns with things like camera operation when I was trying to do too much too fast. Sometimes multitasking, I would get a little bit of that stop and start sort of effect. In some ways, it feels a lot like what I've experienced with other Nothing phones, but Nothing is touting this one as a flagship device. Price-wise, this phone competes with devices like the Pixel 9, the Galaxy S25, the iPhone 16. And we've come to expect, right or not, that a competitive flagship has the latest and greatest system on a chip. And that isn't the case here. Nothing, I think, kind of dug itself into a bit of a hole with this one. Now, as for the software, this is running Nothing OS 3.5 on top of Android 15. Now, personally, I'm a big fan of Nothing OS. I think there's some really solid touches in there while keeping things reasonably close to stock. Plus, I really actually kind of dig their dot matrix approach. You find throughout, depending on how you set the phone up, you find these little dot matrixy kind of images, and you can really go deep into the dot matrix rabbit hole if you want to and have it, all monochromed icons and everything. It's a little hard for me to use the phone when it's too monochromed like that, but there's still some things that I couldn't get working with the software, and this is a little bit of a bummer. I was really very psyched about a feature called generative ringtones, which is meant to deliver a unique ringtone based on the contact name, also the number that the call is coming from. So every ringtone would be unique to each individual caller. And I could never really get it to work for me. Definitely worth checking a video that Nothing put out. It's very interesting on how they designed that feature. And I did get an OS update that mentioned something about a fix to that, but it didn't really work for me. Also, Essential Notifications System. This is a system that allows you to customize the Glyph Matrix output based on rules that you design. So you could, for example, set up a rule that says anytime a message is left on this particular app from this particular person, do this on the Glyph Matrix. For whatever reason, I couldn't get that to work, and I struggled for a while trying to figure it out. So ultimately, I was let down on some of the new stuff. But I do continue to enjoy the Essential Space integration a lot. Nothing also offers 5 years of OS updates, 7 years of security, which I think is pretty solid for this price. All right, now let's talk about the cameras. And this is another twist, but let me set this up for you. 3 rear cameras, all 50 megapixels. Sounds very nice. The main sensor has great results in well-lit shots, I'd say, most of the time anyways. Low light output, okay, but definitely lags behind others in this price range. The ultra wide looks okay as well, though a little long in the tooth at this point. It could use an update. It also doesn't have optical image stabilization. That lets it down. The telephoto does double duty, and it's a mixed bag. First, 3x optical periscope lens. That sounds great. It produces some okay output. Definitely, I think, would benefit from optical image stabilization. The mode you want to check out, though, is the macro mode, which is also dialed into this same lens. So this lens does double duty. Macro, I would say, is often added as a spec sheet filler. Usually it's the worst output of them all, especially in lower cost phones. Well, here, it's perhaps the most impressive camera function. Detail is super clear and crisp. It's just kind of fun to play around with when you can get that close to things and get a really nice, sharp, defined image. The downside of this, of course, is how often do we reach for macro photography? I'll take it, don't get me wrong, but it's probably the thing I'm gonna shoot least on smartphones. As for battery life, I'd say it's been appreciable. Haven't really had any battery anxiety days. I'd say almost every single day, I'm putting it on the charger at the end of a very long day, and I have somewhere around 30-35% remaining. There was one day that was a little wonky for me, and that was when I got the new Meta Oakley glasses, and those connect to the smartphone, and they do a bunch of AI things through Meta AI, that sort of stuff. For whatever reason, Meta AI did some work on the remaining battery that day, and I had to plug it in well before, probably at like 5 p.m. That was an oddity though. I'd say otherwise pretty spot on. All right, here's the truth. Nothing wants this to be a flagship device, and it's on its way. But there are enough trade-offs that make it feel like another upper mid-tier nothing phone. It kind of feels the same as a lot of their other devices that they've put out, kind of in a similar range, even if the price tells a different story. Now, one thing that hasn't changed is Nothing is, you have to admit, a unique smartphone company. There is so much sameness in smartphones these days, and Nothing is arguably one of the only brands right now that's throwing real haymakers to just kind of see what sticks, trying new things. There's an unexpected nature to Nothing's philosophy, and I deeply appreciate that. They don't play it safe all the time. And even if the Glyph Matrix hasn't quite captured my imagination in practice yet, I love that it exists because it is truly different. And I'm curious to see what that leads to next. Don't miss my review of the Nothing Phone 3A from earlier this year. This is easily one of my favorite devices of 2025. And by comparison to the Nothing Phone 3, I think I like the 3A better. It's definitely a better value as well. Make sure and subscribe. I got a lot more reviews in the pipeline. And let me know down below, like, how do you feel about Nothing's haymaker approach? Are they going in the right direction? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jason Howell. We'll see you next time.